All right, now that we know what arrays and objects are, I want to talk about looping through arrays and objects. Last week, we looped through strings in order to log every individual character in a string to the console. Well, we can also perform the same logic and the same functionality on arrays. Not on objects, mind you. You cannot loop through properties of an object like this, but you can loop through all the items in an array. For example, I'm going to create my array. Actually, I'm going to create an array called students. And this is going to contain names like Evan, Matt, Sam, Chris, Courtney. And I'm going to log every one of these names to the console. In order to log every one of these names without a loop of any kind, you would simply write console.log students 0, and you would do this with a different index for each name. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that will log every member of students to the console. And before that, I'm just going to log the entire array of students. So I reload my page, and at the top we see the full array, students, the students variable, and below that we see each individual name printed to the console. But this is a really inefficient way to do this, as you might have guessed, especially if you had a very long array, if you had hundreds of names, thousands of numbers. This is an extremely inefficient way to access every item in an array. So to be more efficient about it, we're going to use a for loop. Just like last week, for var I equals 0, and then we need to define our terminating condition. Well, just like in last week, where if we wanted to loop through the string Evan and log every character to the console, we used I is less than Evan.length as the terminating condition. We're going to do the same thing here, except rather than the length of a string, this is going to be the length of the students array. And finally, I equals I plus 1, or we could rewrite this as I plus plus. Okay, now if you don't remember or are not yet comfortable with for loops, we are starting out with an iterator, I, which is given a value of 0. Every time we loop, we are going to be adding 1 to I. So I will start at 0 and run the loop. The next time the loop runs, I will have a value of 1. After that, I will have a value of 2, etc., etc., until this condition in the middle returns false. Okay, now the reason we're using students.length is because this is the number of items in students. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 strings, 5 names in total. So this has a value of 5. The reason we are using students.length rather than a hard-coded number, 5, is because we don't want to always have to count how many items there are in an array, or run a separate line of code that finds the length of the array and then use that number in the for loop. We want to keep this dynamic. We want to keep this so that even if I added a bunch of additional names into this array, it would still run, this for loop would still run as many times as we need it to. So it is very, very common logic to use the length of an array which you are looping through as the terminating condition. I is less than your array.length. If it still doesn't make sense, I'll dig a little deeper in a second. And inside this for loop, the code that we're going to run is going to be to console.log something. And what are we console logging? We're logging every name in the array, every individual item in the array. So we want to log students 0. We want to log students 1, students 2, students 3, students 4. But what can we plug into those square brackets that will serve as the index number, which will, each time the loop runs, cause a different name to be logged to the array? This is where we use I. And it works. If you don't understand why it works, let's dig into it. Okay, first, I equals 0. So we're console.logging students 0. The next time we run the loop, we add 1 to I, as per these instructions here, I++. I now equals 1, and we console.log students 1. The next time we add 1 to I equals 2. We console.log students 2. And each time we run this loop, we're checking, is I 2, 1, 0, whatever it equals, is I still less than students.length? Students.length is 5. Is I still less than 5? Yes, yes, yes. Then we have I equals 3, and we're console.logging students 3. And finally, we have I equals 4, console.log students 4. And what happens here is the browser actually tries to run the loop again. It does add 1 to I, but I is no longer less than students.length, which is 5. I is equal to 5. So this, when I is 5, causes the terminating condition of your for loop to return false, and the for loop breaks. This is what's happening here. We are using I, a variable which increments by 1 each time we run this loop, to log each individual student in the students array. And it works. And once again, because we're using students.length as the terminating condition, no matter how many additional names we add here, they will all be logged to the console. If we had used a hard-coded number like 5 as the terminating condition, they would not. Okay, so this is looping through an array identically to how we looped through strings in the previous week's material. Looping through an array and looping through strings are exactly the same. Now think about why you might want to loop through an array. It may not seem very useful to just list everybody out like this, but it can be extremely useful. You can do anything in this for loop as you're looping through the array. We don't have to just console.log each student's name. We can actually write every student's name to the HTML document. Create a list that can be printed out. We're going to talk much more in depth about how to manipulate HTML elements in JavaScript soon, but this is one thing you can do. Or you could concatenate each item in the array somehow. I mean, we could add student I plus is a student at Codify Academy. So this is a way of concatenating each item in the array with an additional string to make a meaningful sentence using natural language. If this array were an array of numbers, we could perform arithmetic on each number. In fact, let's try that. I'm going to create a num array of 2, 4, 6, 8. I'm going to change students in my for loop to num array, and we're going to document.write num array I times itself. So we're going to see the square of every one of these numbers. 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 4 is 16, 6 times 6 is 36, 8 times 8 is 64. So now we're manipulating each item in the array in some fashion. But perhaps most importantly, what we can actually do is check each item in the array. Let's go back to students momentarily. And let's create a prompt username. This is going to be prompt. What is your name? Well, maybe we want to check if the user visiting our site is actually a student. So what we might do is, as we loop through students.length, we're going to check a condition. Is what the user typed in contained in this array? Or is what the user typed in equal to students 0? Is it equal to students 1? Is it equal to students 2? Is it equal to students 3? And so on and so forth. We're going to accomplish this with an if statement. If username double equals, because we're evaluating, remember we're not assigning value, we're evaluating equality, evaluating value. So if username equals students I, document.write students I plus is logged in. Let's write an else, which console.logs, console.log, not a match. Okay, so every time we run through this loop, as we loop through items in the array, we're going to check if username equals that student in the array. If it does, this message will get written to our HTML document. If it does not, we should see not a match in the console. Okay, and let me in fact students I plus there. So we'll see each one. Okay, I'm going to reload. What is your name? I'm going to say my name is Adam. Okay, we get Adam is logged in, and down in the console, Evan, not a match, Matt, not a match, Sam, not a match, Chris, not a match, Courtney, not a match, Lisa, not a match, Nick, not a match, Brian, not a match. Let's add a console.log message into the successful if statement as well. Found a match. Let's try this again. This time I'll be Brian. Brian is logged in. Not a match, 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 not a match. Found a match. Found a match. Let's try this again. I'm going to be Evan this time. Still works. Everything looks good. We're perfect.